Hello and welcome to In the Channel from channelbuzz.ca, bringing news and information to the Canadian IT channel community for the last 16 years. I'm Robert Dutt, editor at channelbuzz.ca and your host for the show. Last week, I was at Dell Technologies World in Las Vegas, Dell's big annual customer and partner event. And over the course of the week, I had a number of conversations that I'll be bringing you here on In the Channel. Last week, we featured 3 Dell executives. This week, we're bringing you some partners. Today, we start on that partner perspective, specifically from one of Canada's top Dell partners. Nigel Brown is CTO of Microserve, a Burnaby, BC-based solution provider that has earned titanium status with Dell and taken home Dell's Client Solution Partner of the Year in Canada in consecutive years. Microserve serves an enterprise and public sector-heavy client base, which means Nigel's job is regularly about taking what gets announced on a stage in Las Vegas and translating into something that makes sense for organizations that don't necessarily move at conference speed. I caught up with Nigel on site at DTW last week. We covered a lot of ground. Desk side agentic AI and what it's actually going to take to make that real for customers, the very real cost of token economics, why he's had to be, as he put it, more of a jerk about cyber resilience, and why the Canadian data sovereignty conversation is more urgent than most people realize. Let's get right to it. My chat with Nigel Brown. Nigel, thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you guys are here, obviously, as a titanium level Dell partner, 4 consecutive years as the Client Solutions Partner of the Year in Canada. You know, what's your overall read on this week? You know, what are you what made your ears stand up? What caught your attention? What are you taking back to both your team and to your customers when you go back to Burnaby?
That's a really good question. It's also a big one. There's been a lot of announcements, a lot of dialogue over the last couple of days. Right? So, trying to process that a little bit, assuming you're going to ask me that. I think the biggest takeaway I had, everybody's heard OpenClaw. Everybody's heard, all the IT people are terrified of it, right? So it's more, how do we get rid of it in our environments? So seeing this whole push around desk-side agentic AI, especially given our market and where we play a lot with clients. That one I actually had the opportunity. I did the lab today because I couldn't resist seeing what it's like. And, governance and security wrapper around it totally makes sense. And it's kind of opened my eyes. I think that's probably the biggest, right? Beyond that, I would say, so the Dell hardware being able to run frontier models, seeing Gemini running local, for sovereignty conversations, I think that's a really good thing to see as well, right?
Along those lines, obviously you touch on one of the big stories this week, which is desk side AI, the idea of physical infrastructure that's at or near the customer's desk, either in the data center or right there in the PC, that's processing the models locally. It sounds like something that you're interested in. I'm curious where it lands for your customers. Is it something that's a conversation point, or is it ahead of where they are in the AI discussion at this point?
I would say broad scope. I don't want to lump all my customers into one bucket, right?
Fair.
Yeah, but broad scope, it's ahead. I don't think you're seeing a lot of organizations. Now, we also deal heavily, public sector, enterprise accounts, for example. We're doing more and more as sort of commercial market where you're going to see a little bit more, playing or adoption within tech teams. But in ours, I'd say this is, we're definitely ahead right now.
So it gives you a chance to kind of get in there and pitch the idea as something new and plant those seeds.
Once I get past my IT and security folks, then that's where it's all going to start, right? If I can't get it through mine in a good conversation, then I'm never going to be able to with our clients, right?
Right, but it sounds like there's at least that, from your comments on OpenClaw, it sounds like there's at least there's that door, right? There's that area of interest.
Seeing it today under the NemoClaw NVIDIA umbrella, I think there's definitely, they've set it up closed by default. It can't leave the box. That's what I saw in the lab today, right? So until you set up essentially like a firewall rule to allow it to do something, it's a safety net that I think really opens the conversation and allows the idea of like end users actually playing, or those, the early adopters anyways, really going, how could I, integrate agentic into organizations, right?
Man, how often does it come back down to governance with AI?
Oh, absolutely. That's pretty much the name of the game everywhere, and some are doing it well, and many are still scrambling, right?
You touch on you guys having a lot of public sector, healthcare, education, all those kinds of verticals. Not always the fastest to move on new tech. Along the lines of the previous questions, but sort of taken out a notch, how much of what the AI announcements we've heard this week kind of translate directly to where your customers are at versus how much needs to be, shall we say, adopted for the reality of your accounts?
Well, you go to any of these events, right? And it's here, we're behind if we're not doing agentic everywhere. Reality is it's not true, right? Well, I think it's very forward thinking or very optimistic to think we're all moving that fast. It's headed in that direction quicker and quicker. It's executive tables are always the ones sitting there when we want it, we need it in our organizations, we're going to get left behind. So it's very top of mind. Some of the organizations, though, very niche deployments. They're figuring out the right solutions. Healthcare, I've seen it. They've done some phenomenal things in radiology and other areas, right? So it's picking up. We're dealing with one client right now that's looking at online pharmacy, and they're looking at a huge Dell compute cluster to do AI on, right? So you see it, but it's not commonplace. It's not every organization, especially as you get into municipalities, things like that. They're sitting there. It's Copilot at best, is really where they're trying to play, and their user base just isn't adopting that even, right?
So it sounds like there's at least a couple steps there that need to be had to get to the point of A, using what's already in place, and B, then potentially looking on to building out something internally, and the stuff that's been talked about here a lot, the idea of running a lot of those AI workloads internally, data center side.
Yeah, and I think it's going to get there for sure, right? Right now, the conversation's got to be outcomes, not I want AI. And right now, that's so heavily, well, I know I need it. I don't know what for yet. So, and I've seen it even some peer groups I'm a part of, the dialogue, well, we're going to do AI. We're going to build agents. I go, what for? And then there's a long pause, so, driving outcomes conversations is where it's going to start, in my opinion, right? The hardware is going to follow it. And that really ties into, well, where are you going to run it? Do you understand token economics or tokenomics, whatever the buzzword is right now? And that's a really big deal, I think, for me, getting that message out really loud and clear around the cost of tokens. I've done it. I've gotten burned. I spent $100 in the airplane because I wanted to see Claude Cowork do something cool, right? And you're going, wow, if I can do that in 10 minutes, I think of large organizations, what this will cost them if they don't find a smarter way to run it, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, in that it's not something that you necessarily understand, but it's something you can sure feel if you start to have adventures with this stuff.
Well, exactly. And all it's going to take, like I said, a lot of organizations, Copilots, where they started under the Microsoft umbrella because it was like an easy button. It was there for them. It was already set up, right? I am worried about some of the days of that changing where that subscription turns into, usage-based models, and we'll see where that goes, right? You're seeing it with Anthropic. You're seeing it with Perplexity. I bounce off my limits all the time, right? Because most of what I'm doing, I can wait till tomorrow and not pay more, but, it's easy to get out of control, right?
And user computing is pretty core to what you guys do. There's a few things going on there between Windows 11 end of life support coming in October, the AI PC push coming from every direction at the same time. I'm curious if those two things are kind of coming together in customer conversations as one refresh decision, or are they still separate tracks between kind of need to modernize for the Windows upgrade versus need to modernize to get the most out of AI workloads?
Well, I think, the end of support conversation, hardware refresh, honestly is the biggest driver of the conversation that I've seen. And then that leads into well, do I need an AI PC and why and what's going to run on it, right? And so everybody's exploring and everybody's curious about it. There's more skepticism if I need it now, right?
How is that hitting along with the current fun situation with hardware constraints and prices spiking? And we're hearing pretty directly from Jeff Clark that, telling customers, let us know what you want as early in the process as you can. I think the natural augment to that is make decisions based on, you might have this machine for a little bit longer than you expected to previously.
Totally right. So it's very much, my dialogue with our clients. It's future proofing, right? You better do it now. You don't want to be stuck with a machine that can't have an MPU for the next 5 years. So even if right now there's skepticism on how much is going to run and use it today, I think it is an important conversation to have and make sure that we're ready for, the moments where we're really seeing workloads and, inferencing running on device. I think that's, you have to have the conversation now and pre-plan for it, right? But yeah, it's been, especially in public sector, it's a hard conversation to have right now. Supply chain, we're like a broken record. It still surprises me how many clients we talk to that haven't seen this coming, that don't know it's real, or you get the ones that are kind of going, well, I think it's going to clear up by September. I'll just wait till then,
Oh, and man.
This is yours, guys, brace for it. We've got to be ready. And yeah, it feels like a broken record. It's just having that conversation on repeat these days. And, it's more urgency around what device type are you picking, making sure we've done model selection, thinking for the future, right?
Fun time to be a partner in that particular space.
Well, it's like a quote volume has quadrupled because that same customer deal might take 4 different times before they've made it through, especially in government, right? Yeah. Pricing validity is a real challenge, right? So it's a moving target. No decisions ever get made fast, right?
I want to talk a little bit about cyber resilience, another big topic here at the event. You guys run and manage backup practices, I understand, and you're doing a lot of what vendors are asking MSPs to evolve towards. When you get into a customer environment today, what's the most common gap that you see between what they think their backup situation looks like and kind of the reality of the situation?
That's an interesting question. It's a real mixed bag. I always start with just how confident are you in your ability to recover? And most leaders, outside of IT and just business leaders, there's like a long pause going, well, I don't know. Okay, well, have you ever tested your recovery capability? No. So, okay, well, that's where we're going to start, right? And in other dialogues, it's that think they've got the backups running, but nobody's been looking at them because they're coming from doing it themselves, or maybe a mom and pop, IT person taking care of it. They're not watching. They're not looking at tools. They're not getting alert notifications on, is it keeping up and are you protected, right? So that's very foundational. Onboarding new clients is just, let's take them through that journey, do an assessment of that whole environment, make sure we're protected. And a lot of conversations are, do you know that you're not protected? Like if you got ransomware tomorrow, there's nothing I could do to help you, even though I'm your MSP, and that's a scary reality. I've seen that have to go back to boards and make some tough decisions, find budget and solve it. And they usually do, they react fast, but you've got to make the risk abundantly clear, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. In talking to Rob Emsley, who's on the marketing team for the cyber resilience thing at Dell, he was saying that it was 97% of cyber attacks now are specifically including or targeting backup infrastructure because it turns out that's where all the stuff is. Does that match kind of what you're seeing, and has that shift kind of changed what you're recommending to customers about what being protected really means for them?
I wouldn't say it's really changed our messaging. I'd like to think that we were maybe ahead of the curve and talking about storage immutability, some of these key elements of, well, you just need it. That's how we run our hosted service for clients that use that. And if it's, we're building out an architecture for another client, it's just fundamental these days, right? You can't even consider a solution that's not dealing with, immutability, protection, being able to spot, bad things happening. But I've seen it. We've come into the disaster client where, okay, we got ransomware. Can you help us recover? And you go to the backup server to find out it was ransomware. And well, do you have any tapes floating around? It's a tough chat to have, right? And not pleasant. But you see that less so these days, but you definitely see attempts, people trying to do it, right? And even other MSPs, I hate to say it, they're immature enough what they're not protecting. They're not, they took the backup server, joined it to the domain. It's just another device on the network. And sure enough, that's exactly why it gets hit because they didn't plan that out, right? So it's all planning. It's all doing it right in the first place. Yeah.
It's a checkbox as opposed to something that's more firmly thought through. Given that, how do you approach it with customers? From do you come at it as, this is something you should do, these are the reasons why, this is the potential downside, or is it something that's a thou shalt kind of conversation?
A pile of years ago, after seeing an incident hit a new customer, I kind of resolved I got to be more of a jerk. I hate to say it, right? It was, I got to be a lot tougher in my stance. I was being too nice. So yeah, I think in all things on this, my position is generally take a pretty firm line. It's all about risk though, right? And to business leaders especially, that's a term they understand, so related in terms, I'm not telling them, okay, you need this type of backup solution and it's going to do these things. It's all about how do we address the risk that you have right now? and leave it to us to figure out some of the details as we design the solution. Rarely, do we get into the weeds of it, unless you're, a larger client where, we're dealing with a large IT team that has maybe opinions. But usually those groups in the larger environments, they're aligned. They know what we should be doing. Maybe haven't done it necessarily themselves yet, but the new architecture absolutely is going to include all those steps. So it's an easier conversation to have, I think, right?
In some ways, it's maybe giving them permission if you're coming in as a new supplier to them. If it's the stuff that they've wanted to do but haven't really had the air cover to make the case.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes that's where we just come in as that outside opinion to say this is how it needs to be, and our job is often more of just a translator for those IT teams to their leadership to help support the business case, right?
I wanted to talk about the modern partner platform and some of the partner program changes that have rolled out this week and been announced. One of the big things is obviously the revised incentive structure and cyber resilience, particularly called out as a premium rebate area. I'm curious from your seat as a Titanium partner, what does the new structure tell you about where Dell sees the biggest growth opportunities for partners?
Well, I think it does exactly that. It says where the growth opportunities are, right? And largely there was no surprise, in my opinion, when you look at it. It aligns to how we want to lead deals. It aligns the conversations we're already going to have. Now it's just helping incentivize that dialogue, right? So, nothing surprising in my opinion there that I'm really seeing, just better alignment, right?
I'm curious, let's play a little bit of anything can happen here. Vendors like Dell are starting to build agentic AI into their programs, their portals, their tools, all the stuff that you guys work with every day. Where do you see the most genuine value for an organization like your own in vendors agentifying, for want of a better word, their partner programs and tools? And the flip side of that, are there any potholes that you're watching out for as that rolls out?
It's a little bit, the more the merrier, the more tools that you can bring in, that's great. We're always excited to see what they're able to come up with. To me though, the bottom line, and again, back to outcomes, right? It's about reducing sort of the sales off friction in the process. What do we want our sellers to do? We want them out selling, living in a partner portal, trying to find what they need or deal reg or do some of those things that can be painful sometimes. That's just admin work, take them away from conversations with clients, right? So to me, reduce friction, that's the name of the game. Do I want to see more AI generated marketing content? No. So focus on the good stuff. We could do that too, right? Now it's like one prompt. Let me feed something in if I really want to produce marketing content. That's so easy. To me, the more you can expose what matters to us, that reduces friction, that just makes our life easier and keeps us doing what we should be doing and not, sitting there doing admin work, right?
It sounds like, based on that comment, that what Dell and a lot of its peers are doing already is kind of on track, because I'm sure they're asking these exact same questions in packs around the world right now. So
they got it full up. Smarter people than me working in these massive organizations, right? So you're absolutely right. They know the outcomes we want to achieve, and I'm excited that we're at a point in time we can see some of it come to fruition, right? And 10 years ago, this would never been a reality, right?
Right. What's the biggest misconception you think your customers have about what it means to be AI ready right now?
I think it depends on who the conversation is centered around. If it's C-suite, the leadership, it's back to that we want AI. I don't know what for. I don't know what it is, but I know I need it, right? So that, there's the tough conversations to be had. AI readiness is like, is your data ready? We heard that on stage this morning. Most organizations we walk into, AI readiness is like, oh, well, actually, no, you've got no data governance. Okay, why don't we define some of this? Why don't we build process out? Look at the right tools. Or, in the Microsoft lens, we do a lot around sort of modern workplace M365. Well, then it's a purview conversation. So we're, they get confused. Why are you talking about DLP and purview and these things? I thought we were talking about AI readiness. That's what it's all about. The other big one, I think, they're not taking seriously enough the end user adoption side. So no matter what tools, and I've seen it, in Dialogue's gone into their portals and had a look with them, their adoption of Copilot, where they spend a whole pile of money, is abysmal, right? And so then that's the dialogue. Well, actually what you need to do is like, get your users excited. We need to train them. We need to show them the cool things. I think we've been really successful doing that inside our own organization. And now that's something we deliver to our clients as well, is put that message out there. We need to get your teams ready and to think differently, right? So I think that's a lot of the readiness conversations, but at a C-suite level, they're usually surprised on the path it goes, or in some cases, how long it might take to get there. Like your data is in such a rough shape. You're 2 years away. You need to build a foundation here before you can really consume it. Now, some of the announcements this morning, okay, that starts changing the equation. We could get there faster if we have the right infrastructure in place, right?
For a variety of reasons, the Canadian data sovereignty question feels like it's getting louder, and I have to imagine, especially in your public sector footprint, how are you helping customers think through AI infrastructure decisions when data residency and compliance and all that are an increasing part of the equation?
I mean, it's a non-negotiable for most of our clients, enterprise, public sector focused clients. Mm-hmm. It's going to run on-prem. They cannot afford to run it on cloud. Yes, they want the latest model, the frontier models. They want access to the cool bells and whistles as we all do, right? But really, this, I presented at a conference last year on exactly this topic of why it's important to bring it back on-prem. Never mind the, tokenomics conversation. So now there's just more ammunition. And, I chatted with one IT leader, a commercial client, not public sector, and his he was all proud of how he migrated everything to cloud. And we were in a room in a session where they talked through the tokenomics challenge, some of this dialogue about another reason why sovereignty is important too. And you watch the look on his face go, wow, I'm going to have to start building a data center again. I thought I got out of that, and he was sitting there with his CEO in their room in that conversation. And it's a kind of a wake up call to some of these areas. So my dialogue, talk through what does Patriot Act mean? What is it, FISA Section 702, I think. It's a little bit scary, and people are shocked not realizing the access you have, even though, hey, I thought, running in, whether it's Google Cloud, Azure, whoever, running it in a Canadian location was good enough. So no, that provider has access to your data.
Have you heard of the Cloud Act?
Exactly. So at FISA, that's nothing compared to the FISA 702. They don't even need to ask. They can just go and get it, right? And that's pretty scary. And, so yeah, it's, to me, a lot of our jobs now is just sharing and communicating the right things, I think, to our clients and making sure they're aware,
Is that, aside from your obviously your efforts to bring that education, do you find that the level of general awareness is on the rise, is getting there? Are we getting to more of the discussion about how to solve for this rather than this is the scope of the problem, or is that still an early stage conversation?
I would love to say it's more mature. The reality is, no, it's early stage conversations. You get anomalies. We were with some clients who are way ahead of this game that have just deployed Azure Local on Dell infrastructure. They're doing amazing things. They're moving fast, right? So now it's more that, hey, how can I partner with you to go and share this message, why you went there, why you built it this way, what are you doing about it, right? Things like that. So yeah, no, it's going to be a continued push, much like the supply chain story, right? There's these dialogues just on repeat as you walk into new clients, right?
Last one for me, along the same lines, actually is the first one, but a little bit different lens. What's one thing from this week that you think will genuinely change what Microserve brings to customers in the next 12 months?
I come back to where we started on the side agentic AI. That was not on my radar, not in a serious way. Other than, hey, let's play around with this. Let's lab it out, see where it's getting explored. When you see a name like Dell behind what we're doing, that got me more excited than I would have thought in terms of, okay, well, I want to pilot it inside of our org. And if we can start building something that works here, then absolutely, I think taking that to clients and coming in and saying, okay, look at the GB10s, look at the GB300s, let's move up the ladder here. It's a tangible path that gives them more value than, trying to build big solutions, right? So I think there's quick wins there. And that's what excites me, is showing a customer how there could be a quick win if we did this right, and that's exciting to me. And that's, I think, definitely something I want to take away.
And definitely it would seem ties into the last thread we were pulling on, the idea of, okay, you're telling me I shouldn't have all this stuff running on public cloud, so where's it going to run?
Well, exactly, right? So it does. Where's it going to run? And no, you don't need to go and, you're not talking megawatts and data centers here. If all I want to do is figure out how to, automate tasks and do some of this lower level stuff, right? And I think that's going to be an interesting entry point for a lot of clients of just like making it more accessible. Everybody's used, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever tool of choice. So now they're into prompting. Nobody's really understanding cowork or understanding agentic is a big buzzword, so I think that's our job. If we can show them art of the possible in some of those things and actually mock up use cases, then I think, those are quick wins. And then it is something deployable at scale and just move it from the little box to a bigger box. The more people are taking advantage and I keep moving up the scale, you don't need to go and spend millions up front, play around with something like that, right? So it's going to open more doors, I think.
No shortage of interesting opportunities. Good luck on getting out there and chasing those. And thanks again for making the time this week.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
There you have it, Nigel Brown from Microserve. I'd like to thank Nigel for making time last week in Las Vegas. And if you listen to the full conversation, I think you'll agree he came prepped and was refreshingly candid throughout it. Thanks to you, as always, for listening. Few things I'll take away from this one. First, the outcomes before hardware framing is where every AI conversation has to start right now. What do you need AI to do? Has to come before where are you going to run it? And until you can answer the first question, the second one doesn't really matter all that much. Second, the tokenomics point is something every MSP needs to be ready to put in front of clients. And Nigel's own story about burning $100 on a single flight testing Claude makes it personal in a way that lands better than any slide deck. And third, the cyber resilience be a jerk philosophy, that you have to take a firm, non-negotiable stance on backup and recovery, is something that I'd encourage anyone running managed services to take to heart. The story he told about arriving after a ransomware event and discovering that backup server was compromised too is not an edge case. That happens. If you're enjoying the show, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, most of the podcast directories. And if you have a moment to leave a rating or review, that really does help us reach more of the Canadian IT channel community. Until next time, I'm Robert Dutt for channelbuzz.ca, and I'll see you in the channel.